Vineet. I deliberately haven't introduced everybody individually on the panel. I know you have their biographies online or in the booklets. But I know we've got at least 2 engineers on the panel. It seems like we should have some architects on the panel. We're hearing a lot about the architecture of transformation necessary for leaders, and we'll come to that, trying to avoid using the verb architecting, but that's the English graduate in me reacting against that. The 2 we haven't heard from, Tammy Erickson and Georg Polzer. Tammy, you are involved in, or have been involved over a long period in helping companies build more intelligent organizations. What are you seeing in the changing way in which leadership is interpreted by companies?
Well, it's, I love both the example and also certainly the perspective that Herminia provides on how leadership is changing, because it's very consistent with what I've seen. I've actually spent, I hate to say, close to 40 years working with companies, helping them answer questions like, how can I be more innovative? How can I be more collaborative? How can I get people more engaged? And I've spent most of that time just, in some ways, watching them and thinking about what do I see that seems to be consistent in terms of the way people lead and the types of companies that are really successful. I've also spent a lot of time talking to people about what they want. And one of the things that struck me a number of years ago were conversations that I had with younger leaders, people who were in their then 30s or early 40s. And one in particular, I remember a young man that I was having lunch with. We got to talking about the senior executives in his company. And he was clearly very successful in their eyes. They were investing a lot in him. They were sending him to all kinds of leadership development programs. And at one point he said to me, you know, I don't know why anyone would ever want to do what those guys do. I said, well, don't you think they think you do? Well, he said, maybe so, but I don't. I don't admire them. I don't care for the way they've led the company, and I don't want to replicate those skills. So what I've observed is that companies that do things successfully and people who are coming along are converging around an idea of a new type of leadership. And I think both of those are important. And to quickly answer Andrew's question, I think leadership requires 4 things today. I'd actually boil it down to that. One is, I think leaders have to create the capacity for information to flow back and forth. I like to say create collaborative capacity. And it's very similar to engineering the organization, much in the ways Nilofa spoke about. 2, I think leaders have to disrupt the organization. They have to make sure that it's constantly filled with new ideas and new perspectives and things that challenge it. Leaders can't let organizations get stale. And that's an important role for a leader. The 3rd thing leaders have to do is they have to bind the organization together. I love the fact that that came up on the preceding panel. I think Rita spoke about it. That creating that glue, which I like to call meaning, that sense of purpose, why we're here and what holds the organization together, leaders need to pay attention to. And the 4th is to ask great questions. Leaders don't have to have answers, but they sure have to have great questions, and they have to continually ask them in a way that invites other people to be part of the solution. Now, the great thing about those 4 things is they don't require charisma. They don't require you to be a superhuman, one of a million kind individual. Those are things you can learn to do. They're things we can all learn to do. We can tell, there's enough known about how you create collaborative capacity in an organization, or even how you design an experience so it's meaningful for employees. These things are known. They can be taught. And so you can become a fantastic leader for the future. We all can. We can all help the people in our organizations develop those skills, because those are the 4 that I think are most critically important.
Thanks very much, Tammy. So, Georg, you're running a company that's gone from, what, 5 to 40 people in the space of a year. You're 26 now?
26, yes.
26.
Yeah.
So what preconceptions did you come to in the job you're doing, leading that company, about leadership, if any? Or has it been a question of being in that top left quadrant that Herminia showed of doing, and then realizing you had to do some of the other aspects, strategizing, setting up the architecture?
Right. So I think a big disclaimer here. So I'm as you mentioned, 26 years old. I'm a computer scientist. I'm an engineering leader in a sense. So I at least know how to spell it, I hope. So when I came fresh out of university together with a group of extremely smart engineers, and we started to build the company, set up the company, and in the beginning, you are doing. I spent the first, let's say, half year of the company. I spent in the data centers. By the way, you can't sleep on the floor of a data center because there are holes in it and where cold air is coming up, so you need to actually sleep on the tables. And so
we said this would bring practical examples of leadership, and there's one.
So well, this is just an example. So being really in the machine room and doing things was definitely in the early days was a big part of what I've been doing. And as the organization has been growing from 1 year ago we were 10, now we are almost 50 people, with offices in Zurich and Singapore and also New York now, with 21 different nationalities, and a very special kind of people. So I think I consider also myself very lucky, also in contrast with other leaders who come in an existing huge organization, and I'm extremely lucky in a sense because I can choose who I want to work with and who should become part of this organization, what kind of people I want to have in this organization. But what all these people have in common is they're extremely smart and extremely hungry young engineers, which creates a very special kind of issues and challenges when you start thinking, how do I lead such a group of people? Right? So and I think what Tamara mentioned among these four key ingredients for leadership, the last one resonates with me the most. Where I think you said questions. I would actually pose a little bit differently, where I would call it problems. Right. So the way I currently lead the organization a lot is by thinking about how do I split up the way we need to go into extremely interesting, challenging problems. All these smart and hungry people in the company are very keen and eager to solve. Right, so a very inherent motivation these people have. These people, when they join us, they always have at least an offer from Google or Facebook on the table as well. And the only thing that motivates these people are problems, extremely challenging and interesting problems. They're not motivated even by perks, right? All these perks Google does, right? It's not what people drives them to Google. It's the problems, the interesting problems to solve. Also, salary is an afterthought. The interesting problems are the driver. And so, me as a leader, I need to make sure that I have enough interesting problems to keep these people on board and keep them within the organization. And they stay as long as I have enough interesting problems for them to chew on and to solve. And afterwards, the chance is actually rather high that they might leave for either their own company, either for another startup. But this is the last key observation I make. Right? So the way we work together in this company it's very strongly a partnership. It's much less a leader versus employee relationship, but it's much more a partnership on an even level, because these people have hundreds of choices where they could go, right? They have hundreds of companies who would love to hire them because of their skills, because they are best statisticians, they're best machine learners, they're best programmers, and so it's much more a partnership where we together work on a very interesting problem and on a meaningful problem as well, right? So I think I forgot to mention that as well, and work together for a while, grow together, right? We are all learning and growing together as much more as partners, rather than a top-down leadership approach, and that's how I perceive the leadership of such a young and very technical organization. I would believe could be definitely a prototype of many of these startups, technology startups currently emerging with very similar challenges.
I mean, one of the questions that I have for the rest of the panel, maybe starting with Vineet, since you managed to achieve such a turnaround, both literal in the structure and of the company itself, the company's fortunes at HCL, is the point at which you're standing on that ledge asking people to jump. There's clearly a moment in a crisis when people do look to the leader. So it might be structured as a partnership. There might be a sense of cooperation. There may even be a structure where it is, a bit like the Morning Star example, a leaderless corporation. But somebody's going to have to be looked to for the decision in a crisis. And I wonder whether in your case at HCL that felt like the ability to sort of delegate to other people those types of decisions wasn't really available. Is it ever available in a crisis for a company which is structured even in quite a radical, non-hierarchical way?
I think that's a great question, and there was a very interesting comment made yesterday. I'm going to combine these to borrow somebody else's idea to make me sound a little more intelligent than I am. I think the first is that the burning platform and the urgency for change has to be created at the top. And therefore, that's a necessary condition. But the direction and the solution, if the top tries to create, then there is a definite failure points. Because as we discussed yesterday, the market is on the edges, the innovation is on the edges. We have moved away from execution-led, centralized command and control structures to more decentralized, more experience-based structures where the employees are creating new experiences for customers. And therefore, a decentralized innovation experience organization is the future. So that's the first point in terms of thinking about it. But I think yesterday an interesting point was made in terms of the fact that do you have to only wait for the CEO to change? Or if you are not a CEO, then what? And my perspective and yesterday's perspective was, and I don't remember who said it, is in terms of the fact that you have only one lifetime, and every minute you're waiting for somebody else, you're wasting it. So can you bring about a transformation in your circumstances, in your organization, around who you are, and can you influence that opinion? I remember now Gary Hamel said that, and influence everybody around you and bring about a change without waiting for the headmaster to try and bring about an instruction. And I think, so when we talk about Employee First 1.0, which is what I've talked about, when we talk about Employee 2.0, that's exactly what we are trying to achieve. We're trying to say that the whole organization cannot look, feel, experience like one. That whole one process, one way of doing this, that's of past, right? Young organizations like this or the gaming organization we saw are innovating so much, and the only way we can innovate is to break ourselves into smaller organizations which are going to behave extremely differently. And therefore, we are going to pushing the managers today and saying, hey, you are the CEO of your own kind, and therefore you need to create the organization, and you need to do the stuff you need to do. Tell us, we are in the business of enthusing, encouraging, and enabling you. And a quick point, the reason my 360 degree is done by 90,000 employees, and the results are published on the web for everybody to see, and 6,500 of my colleagues do the same, that their 360 degree is done by the employees, is not only because I want employees to feel that we are accountable to them, but to say the following, that we have done what you wanted, right? We are accountable to you. Now, the only thing which we want is from results. So tell us, what did we not do to enable you? If you don't have an answer, then the results better happen. So suddenly the organization became a high-performance organization.
It seems to me, I mean, one of the things I'm struck by in big listed companies is when new chief executives take over, they often say, I'm going to take 6 months, I'm going to do a strategic review, and then I'm going to stand up and say what I'm doing. I'm always more impressed by the chief executives who, after the 6 months, say, here's what we already did in those 6 months, because we were thinking about the strategic review as we went along and changing things as we went along. But there is, as Herminia says, a need for some standing back, isn't there? The architecture point that you were making. I mean, where does the where does this new type of leader take the time to think about a little bit further ahead than the doing and the thinking of the instant problems that George is talking about?
Right. So I like to think about it with a phrase that Tammy uses, which is to say that the role of the leader is to create a context that facilitates what needs to get done and facilitates the purpose of the organization. Has when you take charge in a new organization, oftentimes you have to change the context because the transition has happened because the old context wasn't working, or at least most of the time. Sometimes you can walk in and start creating that more structural and systems change right away, and sometimes you can't because you actually don't know what's broken in that very highly interlocked system. And not only that, you may have some hypotheses, but you haven't brought people along with you. And so often that time, that period of lag that you're suggesting is one in which the leader isn't just trying to figure out what is wrong and how to fix it, but how to kind of rally the troops around that kind of fixing, which is harder because it means that some people will have more and some people will have less, and some people will get more of the resources and others less. So that's how I see it.
I mean, in a big organization, Tammy, there is a need to consult, obviously, as we've been talking about throughout this, trying to get the voice of the employee in a way that will generate ideas.
Well, there definitely
is.
It takes some time, but I think it takes a little less time than our old views of leadership.
Yeah.
Because if your old view was that I had to come up with the most brilliant strategy, well, that would take me some time. I'd have to have a good piece of time to do that. But if I think of myself more like this architect creating context, I mean, an architect can walk in a building and say, gee, there's a crack in the ceiling and this door is in a really awkward place. You can figure that out within about 10 minutes.
Right.
Now, maybe you have to spend a little more to figure out how to change it, but my point is, I think you actually can begin making some of these contextual changes pretty quickly within organizations.
Right.
If I can jump on
yes,
that.
Herminia.
One of the things I find interesting, I'd be curious to know if you think there's a generational aspect, is I have fun putting in front of executives and students case studies of very different leadership styles in creating these kind of changes. And oftentimes, still to this very day, when you show them the example of the person who's more creating the context and not up there saying, this is my vision, my strategy, the students say, well, what did he do? Or what did she do? Or, it wasn't their idea. And it always keeps coming back to, we want that person right there leading the charge. And I've always been puzzled about this.
So you're saying that it should come, that there's still a desire to see something being handed down?
She's not doing her job otherwise.
Right, right. What do you, George, before we open to the discussion from the floor, and we have a bit of flexibility on time here, so we're going to give ourselves time for some discussion from the floor. What have you found works from what you might call traditional leadership skills? I mean, what have you done? Do you do performance appraisal, for example, to take a kind of fairly traditional?
So despite arguing before for a much more partnership relationship between the leaders and the members of the organization, still some old school traditional tools do work very well and need to be used. I think there is a toolbox for a leader to rely on, which also don't need to be reinvented, also in the light of a new nature of an organization, with a lot of extremely smart, hungry people. So, for example, there are things like OKRs, there are things like biannual performance reviews, which also we are using. Are
you transparent, like Vineet, and show your own 360 review to everybody?
Definitely. So this is actually also very, very strong value we have in the company. So all the OKRs, also my OKRs, how I also perform. So I'm measured like there's a score between 0 and 1. How you measured on these. I'm not sure whether everyone here in the room is familiar with the concept of OKRs. So these are objectives and key results. I think Google is one of the big users of this tool to really let trickle down a company-wide objectives and key results, and break this down into the team objectives and key results, and also then the individual team members. But I think it's not unique to Google. Many other companies employ that as well. But what's very key is that this is totally transparent. Every employee sees each other's review, and so this has been a very, very useful and powerful tool on how to use, how to facilitate a certain accountability and transparency of where we want to go and how this translates to your own individual goal and direction where you want to run. And then me as a leader, I can go on our, it's all online, right? I can look at what our engineer in one of the teams has which goals has he defined, and whether this actually translates in the right direction. I can call him up and say, hey, what do you think about it? I don't think this really matches up with where we want to go. So definitely yes, we do use some more traditional also ways of thought.
And what have you tried out? Possibly saying, oh yeah, well they do that at General Electric. Maybe I should try that here. What have you tried that doesn't actually work with the team you're managing?
Let me think. I think that's a difficult question. So, I mean, we've been fortunate in a sense because we have investors and like who invested in Skype, Spotify, Facebook before, and so they've seen other organizations grow to significant size, and we've also advisors who built in the Silicon Valley billion-dollar companies, and so these people. I consult these people often, right, in these kind of questions, and I think we've been very, very careful. So my mantra is really as much structure and organization as necessary, right, and as few processes as possible, right. So I really want to keep this as a minimum level, and really look for a hopefully self-organizing state of the whole company. I think again this is also we're in a special situation again. We are privileged in a sense because we have people in our company which are all above they're usually outliers in their even class of like engineers or scientists, which makes it easier to defer also decisions down. And I think that's been also helping me a lot in using rather loose controls. Back maybe also to your comment in the beginning, so this wartime, peacetime. Of course, I also read the book from Mark Ben Horowitz, I think, right? Ben Horowitz, and I think at the moment we are clearly in a peacetime where I can actually also keep a more freedom within the organization because we're doing well, we're growing fast, and in a sense I'm also there fortunate to be clearly peacetime CEO. Nevertheless, and I think this is an interesting contrast also to Mark, who was I think sitting on this chair on the panel before. The question on how much leadership versus how much management, I think, is also very much determined by the thing you do, the product you build. We're not building a game, right? We're not building a online website. We are building a piece of software that sits in the high security data center of telecom companies. So this means also that the way we work is much more diligent, much more also needs much more quality gates, right, before you go out with your product, compared to a more relaxed, I can imagine, and also more creative way of working, for example, at Riot Games. We noticed that, for example, we have a few people who work with us who worked at Google before, and we noticed actually the way they write code, develop software, is actually we need to change also their way of thinking, because at Google there's very much this nature of let's put a beta product out there and let people try out. And if it breaks, no problem, right? If we ship a piece of software in a telecom high security data center, every single piece of code needs to work from day one, and there's zero downtime. So also changing this perception actually requires some very, very strong management and much less leadership of inspiring directions. Very interesting insight.
I'm hoping that Google isn't putting its beta coders onto the self-driving car. Certainly, I'm not going to be on it. So we've got time for questions from the floor. We've probably got about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll run into lunch a little bit at the expense of your appetites. We will try and take them in little clusters of one or two, if we can. Yes, gentleman here at the front with the orange tie first. I am a kind of command and control chairman, by the way, so I'm going to cut you short if you don't pose a question within the first couple of seconds. So,
I have just a short question.
Say who you are, please. And
I'm Roland Berger from Stockholm University. I have just a question to Georg Polzer. Do you see this stronger emphasis in Europe on data privacy actually as a competitive advantage in your case? Because usually we hear, at least from US companies, that it's a hindering stronger European data privacy, etc.
Okay, we'll just bank that one. And yes, gentleman in the second row here.
What good is being done by separating leadership and management? Or in other words, would companies be better off if they would have a chief management officer and the chief leadership officer?
Sorry, and your name and title, sir?
Peter Prischel from Austria.
Are you a leader or a manager?
I'm sort of struggling along and trying to figure stuff out, like Martin.
Like everybody, in fact. So, Georg, just briefly on the first question.
Yes, so I think it's unfortunately it's not a clear-cut answer here. So definitely, I mean, we've tackled the data privacy regulations, we're compliant to data privacy regulations even in Germany, which are considered to be one of the most strictest in the world. And so as we now grow into other markets, the question of and so what about data privacy is answered very, very quickly, which makes it very easy in a sense. On the flip side, we were very fortunate to open an office in Singapore very early on in the history of the company, because in Singapore, there are use cases being explored and developed of our product, which you wouldn't think of, actually, in the context of a very, very conservative German market, where in Singapore, the restrictions on what you can do with the data is actually lower, and the impact on the innovation of the product, also back to our offering here in Europe, has been very positive and fruitful, because there was a more open-minded thought on which products, which functionalities are possible, what things can be done with the data. So I think I think the best thing is to have an office indeed in a region where there's very lax data privacy laws, and at the same time have also an office and product management team in Germany, and combine the best of both worlds.
So let's just get to this second question on should we be splitting these functions? Chief Leadership Officer sounds bad to me, and Chief Management Officer, Herminia.
Well, we already do. The CEO is the de facto leader and the COO is the de facto manager. But I don't think it's particularly helpful to have that kind of split, because the original idea was not that these are two kinds of people. The original idea was that these were two kinds of things that need to get done, one being more about exploration and change, and one that is more about efficiency and reliability. And if you go to a system where there's only one person, or you have some people who have the title of thinking about strategy in the future, and other people who I said, no, you're just about the boring stuff, that's not particularly helpful.
Vineet, you appointed a Chief Operating Officer, didn't you, just before stepping down as CEO?
I did, and this is an interesting question we've always struggled at, and this is the answer we came to after 7 years. As an individual contributor, you come up with, let's say, 100 output. As a manager, you're supposed to put resources together and manage them and produce what I call a 500% output, right? Compared to 100 output of individuals, it's 500% output. So you get a 5x growth just because you are an extremely good manager, and as you rightly said, it's all about being more efficient, more effective. But the moment you move from being an efficient and effective manager into leader is about inspiring people to do things which they consider impossible. And high-performance teams are those who do things which others consider impossible. And therefore, we suddenly move from 500 to 50,000, right? It's an exponential growth. And therefore, it's not that the role of leader and manager is separate. It's an evolution of a person, and it's an evolution of a mind. That how much output can I produce? How much effectiveness can I produce? And therefore, it is efficiency as an individual contributor, effectiveness as a manager, and transformation as a leader. And therefore, organizations grow through this cycle, individuals grow through this cycle, and teams go through this cycle.
Great. We'll take another couple of pair of questions. Yes, over on the far side there. Could you say who you are and who you represent?
Michael Wang from China. I got a question because eliminate middle layer manager. This kind of statement in China is even get hotter and hotter. Like the big company hire, they're trying to reorganize the structure, eliminate the middle layer managers. This will be a fashion, or that will lasting some essential changes, in my opinion.
Everybody get that? Could you just repeat the core of the question?
The core of the question is, there is a fashion to eliminate the middle layer managers.
Okay.
Yeah, the top leaders and the individual contributors.
Right.
My question is this a fashion?
Right.
Means, phenomenal, okay.
Okay, or is it
an essential change?
Okay,
so
good. Hang on one second, Vineet. I'll just take a second question, if there is one, from, yes, further down in the same row.
Okay. Bogdan was former dean of the business school. I tried to teach the management, and after that I shift to teach the leadership. Right. But I feel that today I have very nice, not lesson, but course of leadership from you. Thank you very much for that. But my question, how we can teach leadership in the business school if our professors are not leaders? Because my opinion is that leadership should be taught or should be taught by a real leader who can know how to do that, how to lead people. And my question, usually what I do, sometimes I invite the leaders in the class, explain how they lead. But substantial theory we should have from management. But leadership is much more art, not exactly theory. What do you think? How can we improve teaching of leadership in the business school, in the university, and other places? Thank you.
Right. Well, let's start with that one for Herminia, I think.
Thank you, Andrew. So this is a question I have heard very often. I'm a career academic. I have been an academic my entire life. You could say I've had small stints at leading academic departments, but that's about the extent of it. So it's a question that comes up often. I think, honestly, that you need both. That you need the lessons of experience, but oftentimes the lessons of experience are in one place, in one context, in one culture, and it can be very hard to discern what are the causal effects and what might have been otherwise and what was really going on in that situation. And I have also observed that people who do very well are not always very good at explaining and teaching what it is that they do, articulating what it is that they do. What we can offer on the academic side is a larger set of observations, perhaps more superficial, but a larger set of observations, and then the power of hypothesis testing, the power of having a theory that then you test that you can refute so that you can see what actually holds up to the light of data. And that's often very lacking in a lot of what we talk about with regard to leadership. So that's my answer.
Tammy, you have the title Executive Fellow at London Business School. How much is executive and how much is the,
fellow?
is the teaching fellow part?
Well, no fellow part. But, I was going to say, I think, I totally agree with what Herminia said, because I think that the trick is to listen carefully enough to executives and to be able to generalize from that in a way that can be transferred as knowledge to someone else. I loved what George said. I thought it was really wonderful. But I also think that I could tease out of what you said some other, I think you're doing more than you give yourself credit for. You know, you say, I do this one thing. Well, you actually, as you talk about it, you're doing a number of things, but you're not consciously noticing what you're doing. And so I think part of our role from an academic perspective is to pull out of people like George and other wonderful leaders, you know, what are the generalizable, you know, let's notice what exactly he's doing, and let's all figure out how we can do something similar in our own organizations.
Let's just go very briefly, each one of you, on this vexed question of the dreaded middle manager. Is the elimination of the middle manager a fashion, a fad, or is it something that, oh, have we lost middle management forever and it's just going to be... Herminia, start with you and we'll go along the line. Briefly.
Well, I think it's an enduring trend for organizations to get flatter and have fewer layers. I don't think we've seen the last of the middle managers, and I'm reminded of the time when Google decided we don't need these people, it's just bureaucracy, let's get rid of them. And that didn't last very long. A few months into it, the engineers were back saying, hey, we need those people. We really want them to do what they do because they're creating a context that allows us to do what we do.
Okay. Vineet?
I think that's an interesting question. And if you look at the Japanese evolution, they were extremely successful when they came up with Kaizen and all that stuff. And then slowly the middle managers came in and they became fatter and fatter, slower and slower. And therefore, the innovation died in the Japanese companies, largely because of the middle management. And the middle management kept on being average and going up. And that's the reason there is a huge amount of skepticism on this middle management. So what at HCL we were attempting to do, and partly successful, is in asking each middle manager to understand and define what they do and what they influence to be done. And this whole question of the fact that are you effective yourself, or are you efficient yourself? Are you effective because you can get more done from the team and there is a demonstrable, or are you inspiring the team to do absolutely beyond? I think what was missing in the leadership, in a lot of companies, is the definition of what the middle manager is supposed to do.
Right.
And if you define that very clearly, what the middle manager is supposed to do, then we don't have to eliminate it. If we don't define it and he or she has to do exactly the same as the employees has to do it, then I think we need to eliminate it.
Good point. Tammy, briefly?
Well, I agree with that. It's all about the definition. I would say the role has changed in an irreversible way. It's no longer about passing information back and forth, and it's certainly no longer about controlling. The role of a middle manager today is very largely, in my view, to teach. They should think of themselves as teachers, and they should spend their time helping people learn how to do their job more effectively. The best middle managers that I've studied are ones who actually approach their week much like a teacher would approach developing a lesson plan. They think about what the team needs to accomplish, but they also think about what the team needs to learn over the course of the week and how they'll help them learn it and how they'll debrief from it. And
George, will you avoid having middle managers as you grow?
So I think at the moment, I mean, as you figure, we don't have a layer you would call middle management at the moment, but we do have, of course, kinds of team leads, for example. But what I see, these team leads, I think, are the closest resemblance of something of middle management. What I see in these team leads is they're much more facilitators than actual managers, because what happens often is actually that these team leads are either younger or less experienced than members of these teams. We have a young person, which is, I mean, he used to be a police officer before, then studied computer science, is now leading a team where there are like double PhDs in his team, and so he's not a person who can tell these guys what to do. It's much more a facilitator who works together with whom on what problem, much less than a pure manager of you need to do this.
Right. I'll just wind up by saying I remain perplexed by the fact that yesterday we heard Gary Hamel attack Salesforce.com for having 4,000 vice presidents, and this morning I heard Steve Denning extol Salesforce.com for being a great exemplar of agile management. So I'm not quite sure where their middle managers fit in now in that role. I'm going to invite Richard Straub to just say a few words about the author signing. But first of all, please thank our panel for a fascinating discussion about leadership.